I think this is your side. We borrowed it to kind of figure out what we're doing.
Oh yeah.
Oh, no problem. That's why I brought it.
Still out of it from the trip. Sorry.
Yeah.
Get acclimated again.
I mean, this is good. You guys would like it. It's tiny.
Okay.
Okay.
So any questions about vata and its governance of action, transportation, and communication?
I don't think so.
Any questions about pitta and its physiological functioning of transformation, metabolism, and
You would
digestion?
only begin to discuss that. I'm curious.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, Pitta governs the metabolism, and then also governs digestion. So we kind of talked about the digestive enzymes, everything. The big difference between vata and pitta, in a sense, is that vata is action, transportation, movement. So it's the physiological function that's kind of moving everything around and creating things. Whereas when we start to get into pitta, we start to get into actual physical structures within the body. So, the digestive enzymes that actually carry out digestion, and regulate that function. The metabolism and all the pancreatic enzymes and liver enzymes and other things that are helping to regulate, all the kind of chemical energy in the body that's regulating the metabolism in the system. It's said that the blood has a lot of pitta in it because there's a lot of chemical messengers and a lot of chemicals in the blood that are helping the body regulate all the different functions. And then transformation is kind of a broader term. So any time that we're transforming one substance into another substance within the system or within the organism, then that relates to pitta. And so, the most obvious to me are food. You take an apple and it goes through this advanced alchemical process and it becomes part of your bicep or wherever the components of the apple actually end up. So it's a huge transformative process. The other place that I think of transformation happening at a significant amount of transformation happening is in the mind and the nervous system. And it's very similar kind of idea. So somebody's teaching you about Ayurveda and you've never heard about it before. And so you digest these facts and thoughts and ideas, and as you digest them, you determine, okay, this is useful, this pertains to me, this relates to me, I can associate with that, that makes sense. And so then you absorb that information, and then others of it you're like, I don't quite get that, doesn't quite make sense, that doesn't really resonate. And so then you eliminate that, similar to the digestive process. So that transformation of taking information that's outside yourself and transforming it to make it yours is that similar kind of transformative process. And so anytime there's any chemical reaction happening in the body, that's going to be governed by pitta. And so that kind of chemical reaction is really the essence of pitta in a certain sense. The last one is Kapha. And so Kapha's primary quality, as we talked about before with the earth element, is structure. So that's Kapha's physiological function, is that it creates the structure of the body. So it relates to the skeletal system, it relates to the skin, relates to all the physical components of the body. And so oftentimes tumors and things like that, where the structure of the body is being changed, it's being compromised, it's moving outside of kind of the normal limits of the structure of the body, those are often considered kapha accumulations because kapha regulates the structure of the body. It determines how the body is structured and the actual physical pieces that go into making the organism. And anytime there's a piece that's out of place or a piece that doesn't make sense, and that's kind of has a kapha component to it. So kapha really is in a sense, our entire body is made of kapha, because kapha is really regulating the structure of the body. And the other two things that kapha, physiological functions that kapha regulates that we mentioned briefly is cohesion and lubrication. So kapha is what holds everything together. It holds everything within the skin. It holds all our joints together. It keeps everything contained. Holds all our abdominal organs actually in the abdominal cavity. It's kind of holding everything together, cohesing everything together. One of the ways that I think about kapha is like the connective tissue or the fascia, kind of holding everything in place.
I was just thinking that right before you said it. I put this in the fridge. That's so funny.
Yeah, and that's really what kapha does, is it kind of holds everything in place. And then to a certain extent, there's a lot of communication that happens through the fascia because it is a piezoelectric system. So there's electrical impulses and nerve impulses. But, again, I keep using the massage analogies. So fascia is a really interesting thing where it has two states. And one state is kind of like a liquid state, and the other state is more like crystalline matrix state. And so in massage, as you stretch out the fascia over and over and over again, it takes the fascia from a crystalline state into a more liquid state. And in that more liquid state, the fascia is able to be more responsive to the structures above it and the structures below it. And that responsiveness for the most part, at least in myofascial release, allows for the pain signals to be released and for more circulation to get into the muscles and for the muscle or joint or the ligament or the tendon to heal. So kind of the essence of myofascial release and massage is to getting the fascia from a crystalline state to a liquid state. So that kind of relates to kapha and to cohesion and lubrication and how that increase in those qualities will create healing of the structure, the physical structure. So
How do you spell
fascia is Fascia. So that's part of that cohesive quality of kapha.
Can you spell the word myofascial? Myofascial?
Yeah, myo is muscles.
Do you
So
spell
the-
MYO?
MYO, yeah. So that's a massage technique that's often used for pain and dysfunction. So the other component of kapha is lubrication. And so most obviously the lubrication is like the synovial fluid that's in the joints. So each joint has a bursa stack, has like a little sac in it, or most of the joints do, has a little sac in it, and then there's fluid inside the sac, fluid around the sac, and that's kind of what keeps the joint healthy. So that's an example of this lubrication. The spinal cord, the cerebral spinal fluid, through, between the skull and the brain, and then all between the vertebrae and the spinal cord, which is another form of lubrication because you don't really want your head and your spine sloshing around and hitting against your spinal cord or your skull, because that would be pretty destructive towards the nervous system. So the cerebral spinal fluid lubricates that. Mucus is often considered kind of an upadhatu, or a kind of an underlying dhatu of kapha. And even in like Tibetan medicine, instead of calling it kapha, they call it like mucus. There's kind of a correlation there. But the mucous membranes really are a lubricant. They lubricate the nasal passages. Most of the digestive system is made of mucous membranes because they help lubricate things. They help things from drying out, that sort of thing. So that's another way that the body is lubricated, or another physiological function of kapha that we see within the body. So the entire body and all of its functions can really be encompassed through the three doshas, and by understanding, how each of the doshas relates to those different functions. When there's pathophysiology, when there's a disease or when there's a problem in that area, then that helps us determine whether it's vata related or pitta related, depending on how the disease is manifesting. Because every structure in the body, for the most part, is going to have some amount of structure to it, some amount of chemical reaction is going to be taking place, some amount of communication is going to be taking place. So if we can determine if it's like the structure, the actual physical substance, the kapha, that's the problem. So maybe the structure is too small or too big, or it's swollen, so it's a weird shape, so it doesn't, like a vessel is swollen, so it's a weird shape, so it doesn't work right. Or there's a plaque inside the vessel, so that things can't get through there. So that would be a kapha problem. At the same time, you could look at that as if there's this plaque in the vessel, so the enzymes that normally would break down that plaque are not working correctly. There's either not enough of them, they're not being produced, something along those lines. So that would be more of a pitta type problem. So it's kind of the same thing, but not really. You'd have to test for those enzymes or take the person's pulse to determine if it's a pitta type problem. The other would be, if there's a breakdown in the communication in the body, and so the body isn't able to recognize, to detect that there is a plaque in the vessel, there's no communication, so the body never recognizes that there's that plaque in the body, so it doesn't know that there's a problem, so it doesn't mobilize a response to that. So that would be kind of a vata thing. So you could have, three, you could have and this is probably like too advanced really, but this is why we often say that Ayurveda treats the cause of disease. It's because through the pulse, you can determine whether it's a vata or a pitta or a kapha imbalance. You can determine the primary cause of the imbalance. And so the person may be experiencing this clogged artery or whatever it is, and so Western medicine will say, this is the treatment for that. But Ayurvedic medicine will say, well, based on your pulses or based on the other concurrent imbalances that we're seeing in your system, you've accumulated too much vata, so that's the primary cause of this. So that we know that the body is having a breakdown in communication and it's not able to detect that there's this problem, and so that's what we need to treat. We need to treat the detection mechanism, where, as I explained before, because it's just as realistic that the problem could be caused by insufficient enzymatic activity, or it could be caused by an increase of the production of structure in the body. So the disease itself is the same, but the cause is very different in all three of those circumstances. The cause is either vata, pitta, or kapha, and so that's why you often will hear that Ayurveda, treats the cause, is because it has a way of differentiating what the actual cause of the disease is. Where Western medicine can identify it, but it doesn't know if it, what the concurrent causes are. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. So those are the physiological functions of the doshas. Like I said before, those are mostly used in determining imbalance in the system, but they do kind of give a relationship to, what vata, pitta, and kapha are doing. And so down below, we just come back to the qualities. And as you'll find, the qualities on this sheet are a little bit different than the previous one that we looked at. And I'll give you another one just to confuse you that will have different qualities on there. So some of them will be the same, some are going to have more, some are going to have less. But ultimately there's 10, opposites, 10 pairs of opposites. So the most that any of the doshas is going to have at one time is 10. So that's the most that you're ever going to see for any of these. And then this kind of puts those two, the very last quadrant here, puts those two together. So what does, dryness look like in the body? Well, that's relatively obvious. That's dry skin. Activity would be restlessness or, changing attitudes or changing behaviors or changing ideas quickly. The mobility would be lots of activity, very active mind, active lifestyle, active metabolism, that sort of thing. And so lightness would be a thin physique, not having a lot of structure because you have a lightness to you. So Pitta is similar, inflammation, redness, both are caused by the heat of Pitta. Pitta is more light. So I don't think I mentioned this. I mentioned this with vata, but Pitta, they say, is 80% fire, 20% water. So it's predominantly water. So since the fire is lighter than water, then it's predominantly fire.
80% fire.
Fire?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's predominantly fire, sorry. So that's why Pitta tends to, have a leaner physique. The Pitta physique tends to be really well proportioned, and they tend to get really good muscle tone when they do work out. They kind of lose weight easily, put on weight easily. Whereas the vata physique, they tend to not put on weight. And the kapha physique tends to put on weight almost no matter what they do. Pitta also has that heat of Pitta, the fire is basically in our physical body is made to digest things. So oftentimes you'll hear fire related to digestion. And what fire does is it breaks things down, it digests things. And so the Pitta individual tends to have a really high appetite. They tend to be constantly hungry. And that can be for food, or it can also be for ideas, or it can also be for, business endeavors, or whatever it is. They have a really strong appetite for anything that they want to do. So their appetite is very strong. And because their appetite is so strong, they tend to be pretty focused. Because in order to attain that, there has to be a certain amount of focus to get to that goal. And then kapha, so slow is one of the qualities of kapha. The kapha type tends to be a little bit slower, a little bit more relaxed. Water kind of relates to oil and liquid in the body, so they may have more oily skin. I find that the pitta types also have oily skin. Kapha types tend to have really thick skin, and it can also almost feel kind of cold and damp and clammy sometimes because it's so thick. And the kapha types tend to be more pale than the other types in general. Because they have more structure, they're going to have a heavier physique, and because there's a certain amount of dullness in the kapha types, then they're also going to be a little bit sluggish, and the kapha types kind of get stuck in habits, which can be a good thing. I've always thought that's interesting, you either say stuck in a rut or I'm in the groove, which are almost exactly the same thing, right? I mean, you're either stuck in a rut or you're in a groove. But if you're in a groove, that's a good thing, right? It's a good habit. It's like a positive habit that's actually doing good things for you. Like, I'm in the groove, you know, or you're stuck in a rut. It's not a positive habit. It's not helpful. So this habitual quality of kapha can either be a really good thing, right? You're in the groove, or it can be a really bad thing if you get stuck in the rut and you keep doing the same behavior over and over and over again.
Are there habits like that, if they're in a rut, are they usually just habits they can't break? They're not addictions? Would that be different? If people have an addiction, but it's a habit, they refer to addiction as a habit.
Yeah, I think they're very similar, but I think addiction is a more serious.
Would it be more pitta or vata though? I mean,
what's that?
an addiction kind of habit versus a kapha kind of habit?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, you know, we all have habits, right? Vata, Pitta, or Kapha.
Okay.
And so habits aren't really differentiated as like a Vata habit or a Pitta habit or a Kapha habit.
Okay.
So, you know, we're all going to have kind of proclivities based on whether we're Vata, Pitta, or Kapha. Like, Vata may be more interested in this addiction than Kapha.
Okay.
You know, like, Kapha may have more of a tendency towards overeating, whereas Vata may have more of a tendency towards recreational drugs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Pitta may have more of a tendency towards overworking.